So, hi everyone. My name is Heather Monroe. I am an integrative psychotherapist and I specialize in trauma, especially relational trauma, which I define as um, when there is consistent disruption in a child's sense of safety and acceptance, both emotionally and physically within the family system. And I think to be human is to have trauma, whether it's in our childhood or throughout our life, and that it creates an attachment style. Uh, and also, even if we don't have necessarily an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style, we could err towards one or the other, which I think many of us do, even those of us with secure attachment styles. So as I'm going through these attachment styles and the way that they interact with each other, it would be just think about your own life and kind of where you fall within these cycles or within these styles of connecting with other people. So today the topic is trauma bonding, and I find this to be one of the more interesting topics because many of us here are counselors or in the therapy world, and many people come seeking help around relationship, right? A crisis in relationship brought them, or they feel like they can't hold a healthy relationship, things like that, of that nature. And so knowing these cycles is so important for me as a therapist, but also to teach my clients about them. There's so much freedom that people find in knowledge. And if you know me at all, you know that I believe that healing is first and foremost rooted in awareness. And it is in that awareness that we create the foundation for optimal well-being. So let's talk and shine some light on what trauma bonding is and how these things happen. The anxious avoidant love cycle. So just going to do the overview so we can kind of go through what I'm going to be talking about. We're going to go look at first what trauma bonding is, then we're going to talk about who the players in these cycles are, and then we're going to go into each cycle, the anxious attachment cycle and then the insecure attachment cycle within relationship. And then hopefully I'm going to have time for question and answers. And so in this, as I go through the webinar, if you have questions that pop up, please put them in the Q&A and I will try and get to them at the end. And even if I can't get to them, they're really important for me to read afterwards. In order for me to figure out if another webinar, a follow-up webinar is needed, and just be able to maybe answer them in a newsletter or something. So going into what is trauma bonding. So instead of creating a connection with another human being through intimacy, trust, and security, trauma bonding creates connection through deep-seated fear, intensity, and sexual feelings and physiology. That's what I'm talking about with trauma bonding in the terms of intimate relationships. So it creates bonding through deep-seated fear, intensity, sexual feelings, and physiology. And that is why it is so hard to break the cycle. That is why we see people struggle with these kinds of toxic relationships again and again and again, because it's so intense and you feel so pulled towards the other person. And that is because that other person brings up in you a fear that you have had since your childhood. a fear that was created and rooted in the insecure attachment that was made with your primary caretaker. So that relationship speaks to an opportunity to heal that. The other reason why trauma bonding is so intense is because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we're going to go into exactly how each insecure attachment gets to fulfill their own belief system through this connection. The other reason why trauma bonding is so intense is because we mistake intensity for intimacy. And when we veer towards intensity in relationships, it hijacks our nervous system, right? Our system that is responsible for fight or flight. So when our nervous system is hijacked and we're so used to that feeling like a relationship, that when someone comes towards us that doesn't give us that feeling of complete loss of control and heart palpitations and sweaty hands and not knowing what to say and all that stuff, it doesn't feel normal to us. And we question whether or not we're attracted to that person. We question whether or not like we're actually into that person because we're so used to the intensity and the roller coaster that comes with trauma bonding. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk about who are the players in this bonding. So we're going to look at anxiously attached and avoidantly attached. Let's start with anxiously attached. An anxiously attached person is going to be, oh, if we can go back a slide, back to, thank you. Yeah. So an anxiously attached person, they are going to feel boundaryless. So when I say boundaryless, another way to say this is that they are connected but not protected. So people who identify as anxiously attached, or who this resonates with, there is a sense of we connect intensely to people. We feel deeply. We feel what other people feel deeply, and we tend to take on other people's emotions as our own sometimes, but also when someone comes to us with an emotion or comes with us with a big emotion, we will take responsibility for it. We will think that we caused it in some way, especially if it's an uncomfortable emotion. And then we will feel responsible for fixing it. So it's incredibly draining because you have no protection against other people's feelings, and you take them all on, and you internalize other people's feelings. So everything is personal. Everything feels like it's aimed towards you, and that now you have to do something with it, that there's a responsibility that goes on with that. So we're highly attuned, which makes us connected, but we aren't able to keep ourselves from being a victim. And that is the main objective of a boundary system. It's to keep us from being victimized, right? It's there in order for us to protect ourselves. The other thing about, and it's not just from emotions that we tend to be boundaryless. It's also in terms of thoughts and ideas and perceptions. So if we have an idea of, about, if we have a perception about somebody, but then someone else comes and says very confidently a different perspective, we will question ours. We will start questioning ours. So that leads to another aspect of an anxiously attached person, which is we have what I like to call a less than self-esteem. So with a less than self-esteem, we live in relationship through a lesser than the other person. We are lesser than. So it comes from a sense of that our inherent worth is less than others' inherent worth. That we deserve less of a right to take up space in a room than other people do. And so we devalue ourselves constantly. So the example I just gave, like if someone has a different perspective than us or a different idea than us, and they come at us with a lot of confidence, instead of standing ground and feeling like, okay, that's that person's opinion, but I still hold mine to be true, we kind of duck. We duck and we question our opinion and kind of take on theirs because we feel like that person has more value than us. The other thing I want to say about less than self-esteem is that there's a real devaluing of self. But the other side of it is that in order for us then to claw our way to a neutral self-esteem or a self-esteem that's equal to someone else's, we have to devalue that person. So let's say that I'm feeling I have a less than self-esteem, and I get triggered and I start feeling really badly about myself. Well, in order for me to start feeling better about myself, I'll start thinking about all the reasons why that person is less than me, or that person isn't as good as I am, or why they're not going to make it and I am, or whatever. So it's a different side of the same coin, greater than or less than self-esteem. And so in order to bring up our esteem, we have to devalue someone else's. A neutral self-esteem is when we realize that our inherent worth is no better and no less than anybody else's inherent worth. And that is what I consistently work on with clients that have a less than self-esteem. It's pointing out where that less than self-esteem is, like what aspect of their life, where they come from lack, right? Because in order to have a less than or a greater than self-esteem, you need to be in lack. So figuring out where they come from lack. Oh, and will you guys put your questions, in the Q&A if you have any. So where does that person come from lack in their life? What category in their life do they come from lack? And then when you see it happening, you correct it by creating the phrase and having that person internalize the phrase, my self-worth is no less or no better than that person's self-worth. And they get to be who they get to be, and I get to be who I get to be, and there's plenty to go around. That's the kind of sense that you want to build and that you want to keep building in clients with less than self-esteem, right? So there's a less than self-esteem. The anxiously attached individual, they present with a primary, it's like a primary fear of abandonment. But what I find so fascinating is if you scratch under the surface, the secondary fear that abandonment is hiding is a fear of intimacy. Because, and we see that, and I see this all the time when they get into a relationship with someone who stays and who has staying power and really cherishes them and adores them and wants to be there for them, the anxiously attached person will be repelled. I mean, there's a part of us when someone stays that we are repulsed. We can be repulsed by that person staying. And that's because we have this belief that any team that I'm a part of isn't going to be worth anything. Because again, like I am worth less, right? So part of the healing process for an anxiously attached person in a secure relationship, or if they find a partner who is secure, is getting them past that repelling phase of the relationship where they want to bolt because it just feels gross. So anxiously attached people also, we tend to be chameleons. We tend to, because we are hypervigilant around what other people are feeling, and especially how they feel about us, we're able to read body language and cues, and we're really good at mirroring another person. And so we're really able to see what that person wants or needs in us, what we need to be. And then we bend ourselves around like a pretzel in order to come across as that person. So you can just imagine the exhaustion that's involved in that. There's a sense, because there's that sense of, if they really knew who I was, right? If they really knew the real me, they would leave me. There's that fear of abandonment again. Anxiously attached people can never feel close enough. It's like when that anxiety, when that attachment wound is triggered, it is just like, we can't get enough. We can't get enough. And anything that our partner says to soothe us is like a Band-Aid. And so, it's like they put the Band-Aid on, we rip it off. They put the Band-Aid on, we rip it off. So we are constantly needing reassurance, constantly. As soon as the words leave their mouth, we need more reassurance. So anxiously attached people have a really hard time regulating their emotions. They have a really hard time regulating their emotional world. Let's see, what else? And then lastly, and I think I talked about that before, is that we look without instead of within. So we look outside of ourselves to tell us who we are instead of within ourselves, because there is a deep, deep fear that we don't have the resources to thrive in this world, that we don't have, that we aren't capable of saving ourselves, that we aren't capable of making the right decisions, and especially we are not capable of being alone. That fear of abandonment is like, it's like a black void, like a black hole that we get lost in. We're so terrified of being alone and being with ourselves that, think about it, if you're that scared of being alone and being with yourself, you're going to be the last person that you look to for comfort, right? Because you're not enough, right? You're not enough to sustain that void, that void that's been a void for so long. So with the avoidant, right? So this is the avoidantly attached person. So avoidantly attached people are going to be, we are super fiercely independent, and we might not be on the outside. What's interesting about about this cycle, the trauma bonding, is that a lot of avoidant people will say, I'm not avoidant of love. I love love. The thing is that that's confusing intensity with intimacy, right? What they love is the thrill of the chase. What they love is the lust in the beginning. Like when all the chemicals are happening, like they love that. They can be quite addicted to that because they crave that intensity. And that is because someone who is avoidantly attached is, in a sense, barely living, like on an internal level. We need a lot of intensity to create feeling, because at a very young age, we learned that our feelings and our needs, emotional needs, were not going to be met. So we cut ourselves off from them. So there is a sense of loneliness to avoidance, to avoidantly attached. There's a sense of loneliness, and there's also a sense of being boundary full. So with boundary full, you're incredibly protected. People's feelings and thoughts and ideas and, all those things, like they do not penetrate the relational walls that we put up, that we are masters of putting up, right? So we're very protected from other people, but we aren't connected. And this is why, to the anxiously attached person, the avoidantly attached, that sense of like being protected, the anxiously attached person would give anything to be protected. Anything. Like they would give anything to have some walls that they could build. But what they aren't valuing is they are able to connect. And when you're dealing with an avoidantly attached person, it takes some time for that person to value connection, to realize what they're missing. Now, here's the thing, and this is why recovery is always possible. We are hardwired for connection as human beings. Biologically, physiologically, we are made for connection. It is in our survival. So when we feel attached to so when we are attached to somebody in our life, being in their presence regulates our blood pressure, it regulates our glucose levels, it slows our heart rate down, it makes our brain waves go from high beta to low beta, all these things. And there's research studies after research studies show how much someone who is securely attached to their partner does not reach levels of stress in stressful situations, will not reach levels of stress as much as somebody who didn't have their partner there with them in a stressful situation, or somebody who is insecurely attached in a stressful situation. So because we are hardwired for connection, there is a loneliness with people who are avoidantly attached that is so deep, and that wound is so hidden even from them, that they might be later to come seek help, but when they do, recovery is absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. But it is first about understanding where that connection was cut off, and for them to understand what the repercussions of that cutoff did for them. So, really protected, not connected. They also, avoidantly attached people tend to have a greater than self-esteem. So greater than, again, we have to devalue other people. So avoidantly attached people, they have to maintain independence, right? At all costs. They have to maintain this sense of, I've got me, right? And in order to do that, they have to create a false sense of esteem, because if they're the only ones that they can depend on, they have to be better than everyone else, because they don't know how to connect with other people, right? There's no room for vulnerability and for the sense of, I need help, right? So they have to be everything. So avoidantly attached people have to devalue other people. So they tend to put other people down in their head, or some people aren't even conscious of it, right? It takes work and work with a therapist, or their own inner healing work, where they can start becoming in tune for how often they devalue people. And when you work with someone who's working on their avoidant attachment, when they realize how much they devalue people in different ways, right? It's mind-blowing to them. So again, it's that sense of lack. It's coming from a place of lack. I have to be everything because no one can help me. No one will help me. No one did help me when I needed it the most as a child, right? So there's a sense of devaluing. Then you can also tell that there's a greater than self-esteem if everything is great until we mess up. And then when we mess up, it is like the veil's been taken, the mask is taken off, everyone sees what a fraud we are, and we'll do anything to get back to greater than. So we go from, we have greater value than everyone, then we mess up, we have lesser value than everyone, and we have to claw our way through devaluing others to get back on top. So it's it's quite the cycle, the vicious cycle, if as you can imagine. So avoidantly attached people, we present with the fear of intimacy. Like, we have a fear of intimacy. That's the primary fear. But underneath that fear, as you could guess with the other, right? underneath that fear is a deep, deep fear of abandonment. Because what if we were to be vulnerable, right? What if we were to need somebody? What if we were to have connection in our lives and then we were abandoned? And there's been studies that show that actually, and this is actually another important thing with the cycles that that insecure attachments go through. But there's studies that show that if you take an avoidantly attached person and put them under immense stress, they actually can flip to an anxiously attached style. So a lot of the time in these insecure relationships, there'll be a flip flop. Like someone will out avoid the other person, right? And as soon as the usual avoider is out avoided in some way, and we can talk about some of those ways, they'll flip to the anxiously attached. So it's quite the dance, right? And fear intimacy. And lastly is that intimacy, it feels smothering, right? There is a sense, and neediness is weakness. It's repelling to us. And it's not just repelling, it's also like a told you so moment. So when we see other people's needs, it's like, see, like that's why I don't get close. And that's why I don't count on other people, because to be in need is weak. It's just weak. This is how we create a self-fulfilling prophecy within these insecure relationships. So if I'm an avoidantly attached person and my fear is intimacy, then I'm getting in relationship time and time again with someone who all they want is intimacy. Like they can't get enough of me. They are craving intimacy. It's like they want to be inside me intimacy. You know, it's like an anxiously attached person's their need for the intensity of intimacy is so intense that it creates that as the avoidantly attached person, it creates the validation of why I need to maintain my independence, because this is look what happens when people aren't independent. They become needy and gross and clingy and weak. Now, the anxiously attached person, right? Our fear is abandonment. And look at the person we're getting into relationships time and time again. People that are consistently going to abandon us. People who are going to consistently validate the belief that I am worth less, right? That I am going to be alone, that I don't deserve love, that I'm too much. So it's a perfect storm. It's like just a clashing of wounds. It's a clashing of relational trauma, which is why, again, it's trauma bonding at its finest, I guess, you know? So I hope I explained anxious and avoidant within relationship and what that looks like. And I would love for you guys to do an anonymous poll right now. Can you pick up? Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys, like, which player do you identify with? Do you identify with avoidant or anxious? And again, this is totally anonymous. No one will ever know this. Again, even if you are secure, you might like go one towards the other, you know? So the results are in, and 64% identify with anxious, and then about 40, it keeps changing, but 41% identify as avoidant. Then there are also those of us, and these are much fewer of the insecure attachments, but that might identify as both, and that would be a disorganized. Now, there's difference between going back and forth within the insecure cycle. Okay, so there's a difference between like being out avoided and becoming anxious, or being out anxiously attached and becoming avoidant. There's a difference between that and being a disorganized. Disorganized attachment is much more hyper reactive. There's no organization. So even though when I went through anxiously attached, it's there is an organization to it, right? We know what's going to come next. It's predictable, right? And with avoidantly attached, it's predictable. There's a predictable attachment. With disorganized attachment, there is no prediction. It is a complete trauma reaction all the time. It is a 1 minute I'm submissive, the next minute I'm aggressive. 1 minute I want closeness, and the next minute I am like, get the heck away from me. And this kind of disorganized attachment comes from when you grew up in a home where your caretakers, the people that were supposed to create safety, created terror. So there was terror, and then it would oscillate between terror and intimacy, or terror and safety. So if there was sexual abuse from a primary caretaker, if there was physical abuse with substances, this can happen quite a bit. If there was emotional abuse, but then there was like niceties. And so it was, again, it's disorganized because you never knew what the heck was going to show up in your house. You never knew if the monster was going to show up, or if like nice mom or dad was going to show up. So in relationships, you operate on this, like, in relationships, you operate on there's no trust, right? Now, disorganized attachment can absolutely be worked at, and it can absolutely get better. So that's just to say, like, there is hope for all of us, no matter what insecure attachment we might have. I will say that disorganized attachment takes longer. I mean, of course it takes longer. You're dealing with shock trauma, sexual trauma. You're dealing with so many different types of trauma that need to go through and be processed, and that, yeah, of course it's going to take a long, long time. Okay, so let's get to just a quick review of the attachment styles before we get to the cycle. So anxiously attached. As an anxiously attached person, I'm going to be obsessed with the fantasy. So, I always ask clients, like, is it the idea of this person, or is it the actual person? Like, am I seeing what I want to see? Am I seeing what I want in my life, or am I seeing this person as they are? So there's an obsession with the fantasy. I spoke a little bit about the origins, but if you are anxiously attached, it's because your caretaker inconsistently met your needs, emotional needs or physical needs, when you were a baby. So usually, like, the caretaker was too preoccupied with their own anxiety, or let's say there was a substance use issue, or there was a mental health issue, or they were anxiously attached themselves. They aren't able to attune to the child. Let's start with baby. So they wouldn't be able to attune to your cries as a child. They would mistake cries of hunger for cries of I'm sleepy, I'm tired, but they would consistently miss the attunement. And as you grew older and had more emotional needs, right, they would miss attunement there too. They might become overwhelmed with your needs, or they might be able to meet you to a certain point, but then once it got too intense for them, they couldn't do it. Or sometimes they just couldn't do it at all. And so there was a sense of dismissiveness around emotional needs at times, and consistently at times. And so the distorted thinking in the relationship is, I can't be on my own. I cannot save myself. I cannot get close enough. Okay. Close is never enough. I always need to be closer. And then if we move to the avoidantly attached individual. So if I'm avoidantly attached, my parents were almost never able to meet my needs. So that came from infancy. They almost never got it right. They would let me cry and cry and cry and cry until I just gave up and put myself to sleep. Or now, just a note on that, sleep training and things like that, that's not going to mess a child up in the sense of like they're going to have an insecure attachment because you sleep train them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about many moments. Think about all the moments throughout the days, like with your parents, or if you're a parent, how many moments you have with your children. If almost all those moments that you have with your child, you misread their cues, or with your baby, you just totally misread, that's when it becomes more of an abandonment of their attunement. Now, as that child grows up, if I'm avoidantly attached, my parents were almost never, they never or almost never met my emotional needs. Emotions were not talked about. Emotions were not welcomed in my family. And it would mean that emotions were denied. So there was a denial of my reality as a child. My emotional world as a child was completely denied. Now, it's no wonder why I would then deny it too, right? Distorted thinking relationally would be that needs are weakness. And that neediness is weakness, and that needs are suffocating. They suffocate me. If I'm avoidantly attached, I am a master at putting walls up. And I mean like energetic walls where I will, if my partner's coming at me with a concern, I will start thinking about something else. I won't really make eye contact. I'll look at my phone. Like there are so many ways that avoidance can put up walls within relationship. And the other thing is that I will create intensity outside my relationship, the committed relationship I'm in. And we're going to talk about that in a second, of how avoidants do that. Okay, so let's go right into the cycles. So we can just go to the next slide. Okay, let's first talk about how the anxiously attached person cycles through. So we are attracted to the fantasy. We are attracted to, we see this person and they become our everything. Like they feel like, oh my gosh, this is the person that's going to save me. Look, they're so perfect and wonderful. And you don't see them. I always say this, it's like, you don't see them as, let's say, the partner you're thinking of, his name is Tom. You don't see him as like capital T and then lowercase o, lowercase m. It is just capital T, capital O, capital M. They aren't right sized. They're like bigger than life. The way that you talk about, the way that a client will talk about a person when they're in the fantasy is there is a, I think you guys might know what I'm talking about, but there's there's something that doesn't feel real about it, right? Now, this happens in every relationship to a certain extent. It is the phase of falling in love and that person's Superman and you're Superwoman and everything is great. Absolutely. But the phase of the fantasy for someone who's anxiously attached it's just super intense. There's an intensity to it where they devalue themselves and who they are, and they put all the focus on this other person, which leads me to my second phase. Phase two is I go from having friends, going out, being in touch with my family, all that stuff, work and going to drinks after work and, having my own life, having hobbies, having things that I like to do. And that world, my world, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. I will cancel plans in a second if I think that if the person's going to call me. I tend to isolate from my friends. I stop doing the things like self-care, right? So if I have any sort of self-care practices, I won't do them anymore if it means that I get to be with this person. So my world just becomes more about this person and less about me. Everything is the other person. And there's almost a sense of, this other person becomes my everything. And I move into phase three. Now, phase three is when things start showing themselves a little bit. Like, avoidant, there's little red flags, like little red flags start showing up. For instance, they won't use, they won't put a label on the relationship, or they, are very ambiguous about plans or what they're doing. They everything, there's no like clear answer with them. It's always kind of left, it always leaves me guessing, and it always leaves me feeling insecure, which leaves me feeling anxious, which then ignites my anxious attachment even more, and then I want to cling to them even more. So you see how like this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I deny the walls. I deny the fact that they're putting up relational walls. I deny the fact that there are red flags showing up all over my map. And I just keep going. Then something happens, phase 4, something happens where I cannot deny that this is not a good relationship. Let's say I find out that the person is sleeping with somebody else, or I find out that they have a substance use issue that they've been hiding from me, or that they're a workaholic and they clearly put every ounce of themselves into work and there's nothing left for me. So I go into phase 5, which is, now this can even be a mental health emergency for anxiously attached people. It can really feel that intense. We go into a withdrawal from the relationship, and that's the only way I can describe it. It feels like an emotional withdrawal. You go into shame, you go into rage, shame, obsessive thinking about the relationship and what it was and what you did, what the other person did to you, like all those feelings, deep depression or deep anxiety. You go right into that phase, and then into phase 6, where you start obsessing about how you're going to get back at that person, how you're going to make them jealous, or you start self-medicating. And this is where drugs can come in, cutting, eating disorder flare up, all those things, right? You start creating intensity, right? Within that phase where there's an obsession. You might start driving by their house, you might start texting them, you might start calling their phone and hanging up. I mean, it really gets to this obsessive phase. And then something happens and they come back, or they give you a crumb, and you take the crumb and return to the fantasy. So they throw you something and all of a sudden it feels like it's going to be okay, and you go right to the fantasy. So let's go right into the avoidantly attached, how that person shows up. Okay, so avoidantly attached. We are attracted to the vulnerability. So that's actually what repels us, is the thing that pulls us in. We see the need, we see how we can be strong, and we can, I think subconsciously, how we can feel greater than, and we go in with a sense of duty, like it's my duty to kind of take care of this person. So we are attracted to the vulnerability, and we go in under the mask of seduction. So we are really good at seducing the anxiously attached. Not that it takes that much to seduce the anxiously attached, in all truthfulness, but we're really understanding of what a needy person looks for in a mate, right? They look for someone who is strong and independent, like all the things we are, but because we are coming in with a sense of duty, we aren't coming in as ourselves, right? We're not coming in with our own vulnerability and our own humanity. So we come in with the seduction, and we enter into phase 3, where there's a part of us that loves and gets a little high from the fact that we become the other person's God. So we become all powerful to this person. And think about how intense that must be for an avoidantly attached person. So an avoidantly attached person whose needs were never met as a child, right? think about how their parent was to them. That parent must have been all powerful to them too. So to be in that position of power is incredibly fulfilling for an avoidantly attached person, and it's like a high. That there is a sense of like, yes, like this is power. This is the power I've always wanted. Then phase 4, our relational walls start moving up. And when our relational walls start moving up, that's when, again, we start creating some disconnection from the other person. So, if they come at us with a need or are too emotional, we will scoff it off. We'll kind of deny them. We won't take them or we won't give them like the time and the intimacy that they need. We will deny them of intimacy. Well, we can even deny them of physical touch, right? So a lot of the time, like if an anxiously attached person wants to hold our hand, as an avoidantly attached person, we'll feel that need, and it will just be our instinct to not take their hand, to kind of pull away from them. So we start withholding things from the anxiously attached person. Then we start going into phase 5, where the walls are up, and since when our walls come up, we ignite the anxiously attached person's attachment style. So the more we push them away, the more they claw at us, and we become resentful. We become resentful of their need. We become resentful of who they are. We start thinking of them as weak and less than, and all these things. And there's a real resentment that starts to fester. That resentment validates or gives an excuse for us to create intensity outside of the relationship. So we might create intensity through drinking too much or doing drugs, because it's like, like I need a break from that person. Oh my God, they're like all over me all the time. I deserve to like have a night out and drink, to reach oblivion. Or we always go, or we're just always out partying with our friends because like we need a break and we feel validated in our break through our resentment. We might start having an affair, and we're so detached from the relationship we're in, it like we're not focused. So because avoidantly attached people tend to have that numbness inside, it takes a lot for us to feel emotions, that we crave intensity. So if we can find that intensity in somebody else, that might be where we go to. We might be one of those avoidants that go to that. Maybe we find it in drugs. Maybe we find it in work. Whatever the case, it's outside the relationship. So there's like, if you look at this cycle and this circle, there's like a little circle outside this cycle that means that's that outward intensity. Then we end up at some point feeling guilty, feeling like really guilty about the fact that we just slept with another person, or we've been partying every single night for 2 weeks, or we've been drinking too much, whatever. Our guilt comes, and we can re-enter the relationship, right? We either re-enter the relationship, and this is for the anxiously attached person too. The anxiously attached person either returns to the fantasy or they break it off completely. We either return to the relationship because we feel guilty, or we leave the relationship completely and find another one. Now, a lot of people wonder why they keep ending up in insecure relationships. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, but let's, for time's sake, let's just look at the one big one. And this is what the science shows, is that even though 40% of the 35 to 40% of the population is insecurely attached. So most of us are securely attached. Even though that's true, guess who's in the dating pool? Most of the time, it's going to be the insecurely attached people, because we tend to not be able to stay in relationship for long. So securely attached people, when we find someone who we are attracted to and who we can have intimacy and trust with, we kind of take our chances on abandonment, on whether it's going to work or not. And we go for it because we are confident in the fact that we can be vulnerable, and we need another person. We're dependent, our well-being is dependent on relationship to a certain extent. So secure people tend to find someone and like get out. Insecure with insecure attachments, we tend to keep cycling in the dating pool, especially avoidantly attached. Because avoidantly attached, because the fear is intimacy, it's really hard sometimes to even even if you're matched up with a secure attachment, sometimes that can be even hard. So that is why so many people keep finding themselves in these relationships, because of the way that these insecure cycles work, that they keep spitting them out again and again back into the single pool. So I really hope that this was helpful for you guys, and insightful, and it resonated, and you enjoyed it. And there's going to be a survey at the end that I really hope that you can fill out. It's so helpful for me as a presenter to hear your guys's insights and what you might want to hear me talk about in the future as well. So maybe I can get to a couple of questions. Someone asked, how can I help a young child with attachment issues avoid this in the future? So the biggest way that you can help a child that has attachment issues in the future is to be consistent. So if let's say you're their therapist, or you're working with them in some capacity, you can become a secure attachment to them. So what you do is you manage your own anxiety around their insecure attachment style, and you mirror for them positive regard. You mirror for them your incredible confidence in who they are, that they will get through anything. So it's becoming a secure base. And research shows that children, we just need a couple secure bases, right? You think about like when you were young, everyone remembers like a teacher that really made a difference, or a school counselor that really made a difference. You can truly, truly make a difference just by being there in that child's life and believing in them and not leaving and keep coming back. It's that consistent, it's the consistency, So another question. So as a ANA, that would be an anxiously attached person. So an ANA could be a narcissistic personality as well as a borderline personality. Yes, I think that when there is borderline personality disorder, especially from the origins of a borderline personality disorder, they can absolutely have attachment issues as well as that personality. And it can, yes, I think that borderline personality disorders veer towards anxiously attached because they have a hard time self-regulating because of that deep fear of abandonment, all those things. And yes, just because you're avoidantly attached does not make you narcissistic, but to be a narcissistic personality, you are most likely avoidantly attached as well, because you aren't able to empathize with other people. You're incredibly walled off. You're incredibly protected and not connected. So yeah. What if a person seems to come at relationships the way you are describing as anxiously attached, but there's no real identifiable trauma to speak of? So here's the thing. I think that it all shows up in the present moment, right? And even if we can't connect the dots, that doesn't necessarily mean that the dots that what they're presenting with isn't there. I mean, so if someone is presenting with an anxious attachment in relationship, but you can't see where or maybe they aren't telling you where that wound might have come from, that's okay. I would still be working with them on how to create that sense of self-worth within themselves, and still be doing the same work with them. And I have a feeling that as you continue to do the work around boundaries, around less than self-esteem, around uh, feeling in lack in relationship, that all those things will come up. Because if you say to an anxiously attached person, in a moment of when they're describing when their attachment style was triggered and they feel worth less and they feel boundaryless, and you ask them like, when what is a memory you can associate with this, or when was a time that you have felt this in your life, like an early time. Think of the earliest time you can think of to feel this way. They will eventually get to a place in childhood. And the other thing about the psyche, right? And the other thing about trauma is that so much has to do with our wiring. And like, three sisters could grow up in a house with the same parenting, and one of them becomes anxiously attached and the other one is secure. The other two are secure. It's also about like how our nervous system is wired, how sensitive we are, all those other things. So just to say that it's about her experience, right? It's not what happened to her, it's what happened inside of her. Are you going to cover how to heal, can be healed, or A's are hopeless forever? No, no one's hopeless forever, I promise. So I tried to talk about some of the repair work within the anxious attachment styles, but I would love to do a follow-up webinar just on repair, where we can really go into what the styles are in relationship, and like what are the work that we can do with people who have the insecure attachments, or the work that you can do with yourself. So, and then, oh, you guys, we're out of time, but I'm going to save these questions and look at them. And I am hoping that I can answer some of them in my newsletter that I'm sending out. You also will get this recording in your mailbox from my newsletter, Monroe Wellness. And please follow me. I'm Monroe Wellness on social media. Please email me with any questions, Heather@Monroe Wellness. And I really hope to see you guys next time. Have a great night.